appreciate. So yeah, we have a very successful alumni of our school, most successful, I would say. So I would like to pass it to you quickly so we can maybe get you started.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks for having me. It's great that there's standing room only in this room. I'm sorry to the people outside. I hope they can hear me okay. Cool, so my goal here was just to provide a context for discussion. I'm gonna go really quickly through my life story. Not actually, just kind of the high level stuff. And then I wanted to just have some open discussion about what it was like to build GoGuardian. So just a little about me. I'm from Bellingham, Washington. Graduated from UC Merced in 2013 as a CSE major. And in my free time, I love to bike. I love to kayak. I love to hike. I've gotten into kiteboarding recently. I'm not very good at it. I love photography, especially from drones. And I started doing some VR game development on the side. I'm also the co-founder and chief innovation officer of GoGuardian, which I'm going to be talking more about today. And that's my wife, Rebecca, in that picture. So what is GoGuardian? At GoGuardian, we're trying to build towards a world where all learners are ready and inspired to solve the world's greatest challenges. We founded it in 2014, starting with basic web filtering, which we'll get into, and eventually have grown to serving 26 million K-12 students, about 50% of K-12 students in the US, 600 employees located around the world, and we became a unicorn in 2021, passing the $1 billion valuation threshold. And our headquarters is in El Segundo, California, although, as I said, our employees are everywhere. There's 3 brands under our tent. There's GoGuardian, Pear Deck, and Edge Elastic. So if you've used any of those products or familiar with any of them, they're all GoGuardian products. And just a bit more about what we do. Our first product was a web filter for education. We saw that a lot of schools in 2014 were still using corporate enterprise filters that basically would take the approach of blocking everything that could be harmful. That means blocking all of YouTube, blocking all of Reddit, blocking anything where dynamic content was really generated, which was a problem because in 2014, dynamically generated content was the future of the internet. And for us, we thought education, the future of education, would be with students being able to access all of the resources of YouTube, Reddit, and all of these different places you could have discussions and exploration. And so we reapproached web filtering differently from an educational lens, and we built a web filter that relied on real-time machine learning, that as students were browsing, it would actually assess, is the content on the page appropriate or not? And if it was, it would allow students to view it no matter what website they were on. And this was fairly revolutionary for education at the time because suddenly IT admins could just open up the internet and trust that this machine learning model was actually going to go and keep students safe. From there, we went on to provide classroom management tools. So now that we had solved for IT administrators getting these students these devices that were safe, the next problem was, how do you actually get teachers confident about using devices every day in class? You can imagine as a teacher, if I'm standing up here and there's a bunch of students in my class with their laptops spun around, I don't know what they're doing. I could be really unconfident. I don't know what you could be sending an email that's super mean about me right now. I just don't know. And so teachers suddenly had lost confidence in the classroom, and they had decided that they were going to not use these devices that were starting to be rolled out as a result. And so we built a classroom management tool that allows teachers to, in real time, see what students are working on, see how they're progressing, see where they're getting stuck, and be able to actually control the devices as well. So move the entire class to different assignments, pause the class to be able to have discussions without distractions, and be able to chat with students. Back in 2019, our web filtering product was getting so good in its machine learning and identifying different habits students had that we started noticing that it was able to pick up on students who were thinking about harming themselves or attempting suicide. And so we actually released a product that was dedicated, GoGuardian Beacon, dedicated towards identifying students who were contemplating suicide or self-harm and alerting school counselors and psychologists preemptively so that they could intervene. In 2020, we acquired Pear Deck, which is basically a way for teachers to create interactive classroom presentations, make them more engaging, and allows teachers to understand where students are in their knowledge. And finally, we acquired Edge Elastic just last year, which is a formative assessment company. It allows educators know exactly which skills and standards students are getting stuck on or where they're progressing. And there's a lot more that we're working on now. So we'll go through a brief timeline, and then, like I said, I'd like to just have a discussion. I'll be really quick about this first part. So growing up, I grew up in Mariposa, California, just about 40 minutes east of here. Come from a family of educators, and I spent a lot of my time hiking and skiing and exploring. And I was absolutely certain that I was going to be a movie director. You can actually see me in that bottom right image there with my camera. But in high school, things kind of took a turn. I was a bagger at a local grocery store, and I had the opportunity to be an intern at a local software development company. And I launched my first product, which is that top right product there under that company, which was a lobbyist database for the city of San Francisco. Not very exciting, I know, but for me, it was huge. I got to launch something that real people were using, and I was a junior in high school, and I was thrilled. And I fell in love with the impact to resources ratio, the idea that me as an individual in a computer could go and add value to hundreds and thousands of people's lives just by writing software. And so I started my first business, Sierra Pacific Software. I tried to make it sound really official so people didn't know it was like a high school student behind the scenes. And we built custom websites for local businesses. I think we charged like $15 a month for web hosting. It was not a very successful financial business, but it did give me a lot of learnings in terms of how to run a business, the economics of a business, managing clients, et cetera. So I decided to pursue software engineering instead of movie directing and went to UC Merced. This is what UC Merced looked like when I went. I put red X's over all the buildings that weren't there. So it was a very small school at the time, and I studied computer science and engineering, and I took part in a lot of the mobile app competitions. We submitted an app called Crossnotes, which was basically Pinterest for class notes, where you could pin other people's notes into your notebook and kind of build a collaborative notebook. And I continued building side projects while I was here. And one of those side projects, I'm kind of in the way, one of those side projects was UCharts. It was basically a way for customers to really quickly embed Google Analytics graphs onto their website without having to do any back-end code. And it started all as an answer to a Stack Overflow post. I was building websites for some clients with Sierra Pacific Software. I was wondering how to do this myself. I saw no one had done it. And so I built this little side business, and it quickly grew to about 10,000 organizations using it, including Toyota and Beats by Dre and Department of Education and Stanford. And I also brought on 3 friends from UCM to help grow it. But this is also where I made my first big entrepreneurial mistake, which I circled here. I think we lost the transitions. I would normally hit the button and it would highlight it, which is I had this idea that the future of business was asking companies to donate instead of paying for something. I thought if you just ask people to donate, the people who have money will give it to you, and the people who don't have money can use it for free. It's a beautiful system. We'll get back to that later. Great. So I graduated from college, and my next question was, what do I do? I still had UCharts running. It was doing its thing. We'll get back to that. But I decided I'm going to get a real job. And so I applied to Facebook. When I was a software engineer, my understanding was if I didn't work at Facebook or Google or Amazon or Microsoft, then I wasn't a real software engineer. So I applied to Facebook. I got all the way to the last interview. I was sure I had it, and I didn't get the job, and it was fairly devastating. Also at the time, UCharts wasn't going super well on account of me not charging people. We had $80 a month from those 10,000 customers of donations. It was just enough to keep the servers up, but it was not enough to keep me employed. And so I shut it down. And when I shut it down, I sent an email to all of the customers, and I got this response from one of them where I said, sorry about UCharts. We're starting something and we'd love to talk to you about it, from Aza Steel. See my name, my face is blocking this again. I was convinced this was a scam, like 90% sure. I didn't think anyone had the last name Steel. But for whatever reason, maybe because of the way the Facebook interview had gone, I have no clue. I actually responded. And I agreed to meet with these guys who were starting a company, which ended up being GoGuardian. And they told me about this idea they had to basically take all of this technology that was emerging in education and build really engaging and thoughtful and equitable experiences to help students learn. And I was hooked. And I was sure these are the guys that I wanted to work with for a good chunk of my career. And this is actually them at my wedding 4 years later, just to kind of say how well the meeting worked out. And so I started at GoGuardian, and this was our first office. It was also where we lived. It was a 2-bedroom apartment, 1 bathroom in Hermosa Beach, and we weren't officially even allowed to work there. We could have been kicked out from our lease if they found we were conducting a business. This next graphic is going to be a little messed up, but this was the layout of it. I'll go through it a little bit. So ignore the red people for a second. You may be asking, how do you fit 4 guys into a 2-bedroom apartment? And the answer was you hang a bed sheet from one of the bedrooms. So that creates a 2-way, a wall. And then you stick the other guy, which was me, in the hallway right there. You may say, why not put him in the living room? I still don't know. Honestly, producing this, I was wondering, like, why did I not just sleep in the living room? But the funny part is, as the company grew, we got to 10 employees while still working out of this apartment. And the question was, well, where do they work? The answer was where you're sleeping. So all of these different rooms also became departments. And at 6 a.m., just like that, all of these rooms would switch to that, which meant that if you slept in until 6:01 p.m. or a.m., you would wake up with a sales or support person sitting on your bed taking a call. And that's just the way it worked back then. And it was actually a really good time. Here's some pictures from those days. We launched our first product, that web filtering product called GoGuardian Admin. Our servers went down every single morning at 6 a.m. when the East Coast came online for school. We had burrito outages where a salesperson would go and make a burrito every week, forgetting that would trip the circuit breaker and kill all sales calls, all emails, all programming, etc. But we actually went on to do some fairly significant work that year. We went to 10 employees, as I said. We had our first $1 million in ARR, and we had 250,000 students on our platform. And by the end of the year, we had raised our Series A, which we still consider kind of a mistake. And we also outgrew our office, as the last graphic probably showed. I went ahead and kind of boxed some potential discussion topics, just in case you're wondering, like things that might be interesting to talk about. Things like raising capital, prioritization, early growth, launching the first product, and founder challenges, maybe things to touch on here. Just to go through the images really quick, top left, that's actually during one of our big outages. We're all looking at the dashboard that's saying that our servers are on fire. That's one of my co-founders, Asa. That surfboard under him is actually one of our main whiteboards. We didn't have a bunch of whiteboard space, so we used surfboards. And then this is just the group all meeting. There's me, just to prove that I did in fact exist during that time period. Great, so as I said, we outgrew our office. So the next big question was, how do we move to our next one? And so we got our first real office, GoGuardian V2. It was just this little corner here on the 2nd floor of this building. It looked like that in the top left, just enough to fit all of the people in it. But it was a big deal for us. It was the first official office. We weren't sleeping where we were living, and that felt like a huge accomplishment. There's a lot of like inside jokes that we had around rubber ducky debugging and things like that. And ultimately, the company was still fairly small. It felt like still kind of like a family, kind of like a close-knit team. And we released our second product during that time. So I was GoGuardian Teacher. We grew to about 30 employees, serving about 2.1 million students. Went to 10 million ARR, so we went from 1 million to 10 million. And again, we outgrew our office. This is the product team at GoGuardian in 2016. And there was a lot of things that we encountered along the way that were new for us. Management and hiring. When you have 30 employees, suddenly you have to start talking about hierarchy. Scaling. How do you scale a business from 1 million to 10 million? Scale from 500,000 students to 2 million students. And product management. We had multiple products. How do you prioritize between them? How do you think about what to build when it comes to new products versus enhancing your other ones, et cetera? Great. So then, and when we also outgrew our office. So the next year, we went and we moved into our third office, which was the 2nd floor of this tower here. And a lot of incredible things happened during this 2-year period. We released Smart Alerts, which was our first name for that suicide prevention tool that we had, which was a huge deal for us because it involved so much complexity in machine learning, ethics, experts, et cetera. So we launched that. We grew to 150 employees from 30. We got to 8 million students from 2 million the previous years. We had our next investment from Sumeru Equity Partners, and our company was valued at over $100 million. And we thought, this is it. This is what it's all been about. And again, we outgrew our office. You can see there a picture of around 100 of those employees. a lot of things happen during this time. When you grow to 150 people, you start not knowing each other very well. So you have to start talking about intentional culture building. When you're onboarding people, how do they know how to interact? How do you reinforce that culture? Leadership teams start becoming important. You can't just have the founders, you need leads of departments. How do you start building a leadership team that's right for the company? Scaling operations. You can't just talk to people anymore. You have to send emails, you have to have planning meetings, you have to prioritize in much more scalable ways. And like I said, research and ethics. When you're releasing something like a suicide and self-harm prevention tool, it's really important that you think through the critical parts of ethics and you bring in experts for your research. And then in 2017, that was 2017, 2018. 2019, 2020 was an interesting year for all of us, I know. But as I said, we at the beginning of it, we outgrew our office, and we said at the end of 2019, you know what's a great idea? Invest in real estate and build a custom office, because we're all going to use it a lot in 2020. So that's what we did. We bought an old bomb building that used to be used for World War II bombers, and we rebuilt the whole thing from scratch into the kind of the dream office we had always thought of, and it turned out like this. We went and we established what's the word I'm looking for? Indoor parks. So we had indoor trees, over 600 varieties of plants. Every space that you can see was a whiteboard space. We had custom prompts on all the walls about the problems you were trying to solve. And the entire space was intentionally designed by organizational psychologists to bring people together around problems and provide a supportive environment. And we were super proud of this office that we built. And we were so excited to be working out of it lots and lots and lots. And we didn't, right? In 2020, March 2020, we went 100% remote. Which was really interesting for us because we went from a workforce where 99% of all of our employees were in Los Angeles to a workforce where less than 50% of our employees were in California in less than a year. On top of that, we grew to 350 employees from 150. And we made an acquisition, another huge, like we just piled on the stress on these years. We released GoGuardian Beacon, our suicide and self-harm prevention product, and then we grew significantly in terms of our ARR, and our students ended up serving about 18 million students by the end of that. And we outgrew our office. The outgrowing the office, less of a big deal at this point, but we did outgrow our office again. On the right, you can kind of just see some pictures of the team when we first moved in, and the team near our Christmas party in December before we all went remote. A lot of potential topics we could talk about here: going remote, acquisitions, surpassing the magic 250 employee count number. Not sure if people are familiar with that, but the number where things just kind of start falling apart in terms of communication, collaboration, peer relationships, etc. And that brings us to the last 2 years. We acquired an additional company, Elastic. We received a $200 million investment from Tiger Global, which put us into a unicorn status at over $1 billion valuation. We grew to 600 employees, between 100 and 200 million ARR, serving 26 million students, which was about 1 out of every 2 in the US, as I mentioned earlier. And we started being able to focus a lot of those resources on some of the bigger problems in education, thinking about things like gamification, motivation, memory cognition, and universal skills. Really starting to focus the original intent of the business around creating engaging learning experiences, and starting to develop and put resources towards focusing on that. So I'm going to stop there, and I've accumulated all of the topics that I kind of noted we could talk about, but I'm happy to talk about whatever anyone would like to talk about during this time. Yeah, let's do it.
What is one piece of advice you wish you knew before starting your ventures?
It's a great question. One piece. Oh, I would say that the biggest realization that I had fairly recently is that when you're growing at this sort of scale, you should kind of accept that every year you're working at a different company, and that different company has different needs. And what that means is you're not going to be good at it when you start. When you work at a company that is a 250 person company for the first time, you're not just going to get it on the first try. And so starting to approach your relationship with yourself and your own growth through the lens of you don't know what you're doing and that's okay every single year. I think that would have saved me a lot of pain and hardship throughout the first few years of growing the business. And just realizing that like GoGuardian was not the same company, even though it had the same name, even though it had some of the same employees that it was the year before. I think that was probably one of the most critical learnings for myself. Another critical thing that happened accidentally is how important building a strong culture is. We did that by accident, and it's not perfect, but it's really good. And I think if we wouldn't have gotten as lucky as we did, having a culture where everyone cares and is collaborative and supportive, there's no way we would have accomplished as much as we did during these last few years. Yeah. What else? Sawyer.
Yeah, I kind of had a question about, it's kind of related to scaling, but you know, after you guys released the admin product and you know it was going well, and you guys were saying, okay, you know, we can do more here. You know, I'm kind of just curious how you guys decided to, you know, jump into a new product rather than say, okay, let's focus all our energy on what's working right now.
It's a great question. I've left out the details of that. Not intentionally, but kind of intentionally, I guess. So that was actually my project. When I was brought on board, they were like, Tyler, teachers really are getting frustrated in their classroom, not being able to have insight into what students are working on. Can you build a page in the admin product that teachers could log into where they could look at student screens? And I was like, sure. First, let me talk to some teachers. I'd had some great service design classes in college that had told me to go and speak with users before just going and building something. So I did. And I went and spoke with a bunch of teachers, and I was like, wait a second, this is like a whole new stakeholder with whole new needs. And it's a whole new product. Like, this is not just an admin feature. It's not just a page. This is a whole new solution space. And so I went back to my co-founders and I was like, we should build a new product. And they were like, absolutely not. And I said, please. And they said, okay, get it done in 2 months. I didn't. It took 7 months, but it ended up being the most successful product for the company by far to this date. And that's because, again, the problem that we were solving and the people we were solving it for was so fundamentally different than the one that our admin product was solving, that it just made sense to spin that off and do a new product. And the opportunity was so apparent, and we were so uniquely capable of doing it. We already had a Chrome extension at the time that was capable of doing so many of these things that it just made sense, level of effort to value-wise, to follow it. It's a great question. Oh.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Taya.
Hi, I'm actually here. I'm teaching a class on innovation and entrepreneurship, and we had the whole class listening to your talk.
Awesome.
Here, we just didn't have the chance to walk over, unfortunately. But we have come up with 2 questions at this point. One was, so you talked about building the company and how it became a different company at each stage. Could you talk a little bit about what type of skills you needed to build for yourself at each stage? And then the other question is related in terms of, you talked about the importance of creating a collaborative and supportive culture. So could you talk a little bit about, again, during different stages of the company growing, what were the key considerations for selecting the right people and then fostering the collaborative and supportive culture?
Such great questions. And thanks everyone for joining from that class. So the first question around what are the key areas where kind of that growth needed to happen year to year. In the early days, a startup really requires generalists. These are people who are willing to do a bunch of roles, whatever the company needs, and do them all in the same day. They don't fancy themselves as specialists. They may not be experts in anything, but they're pretty good in a bunch of things and able to do all of that work together. And I think in the early days of GoGuardian, that's something that myself and a lot of my co-founders were really good at. We were good at being generalists and kind of switching between marketing and sales and product and just trying our best to learn on the fly. As the company matures, though, you stop needing just generalists to create the company, and you start needing to really think about specialization. That's how scale exists, is when you start thinking about not just scale, but efficiency. So when you start thinking about the critical parts of your business and management structure and how you can go about making sure that those groups thrive while still being in a space where they can work together. That's a whole different set of skills. You go from just being a doer, someone who can just, go and do a little bit of design, a little bit of engineering yourself, to being someone who suddenly has to think about all the operational complexities of bringing specialists together and thinking through how to work together in a way where they're truly aligned and collaborative. You have to start learning skills like prioritization, communication, management is a big one. Like when you get to a certain scale, suddenly so much of your work is just managing people, giving clear expectations, making sure people are aligned. In the later stages of the company so far, so much of our work has been around hiring the right leaders. It's not something that I expected to be such a hard thing to do in these later days, but finding the right leaders who are going to continue your mission and vision, and continue to support your employees in the way that you would hope, because you just can't do it all yourself anymore. These are all critical ways that I think all myself and my co-founders have grown. I think another thing is just starting to be really honest about what you're good and not good at. I'm not good at managing giant teams. I just don't enjoy it. I don't get energy from it. I much more prefer to manage smaller, very focused teams. And so I've made sure that the role that I take within the company can be focused on what my unique strengths are, and accepted that there's things that I'm just not uniquely good at or excited about. And that's something that I think all of my co-founders have done, and we've been able to find spots within the company that we really can offer unique value in our roles. So those are some of the big moments in learning that I think, or the big growth areas that I think we all had. There's some growth areas across the board as well that aren't kind of year to year, but just overall, that I think were also really important. One was learning how to deal with stress. Stress becomes such a strong thing well, I'm sure this isn't surprising, but throughout the early stages of the company, also in the later stages, but definitely in the early stages, when the decisions you're making are life and death for your company, stress is such an unhealthy weight on your shoulders. And starting to learn how to deal with stress in a way that's more energizing and less detrimental to your own physical and mental health, extremely critical. Another thing is being modest and open about what you can learn. So much of being a founder is about growing and about learning the skills that you need to have from each phase, as we kind of talked about. And if you are not the kind of person to accept that you have weaknesses, all of those growth opportunities, those amazing growth opportunities year to year, are gonna pass you up, and you're not going to be the leader that your company needs you to be. So that's for the first question. Do you mind reminding me the second question really quick?
No, not at all. And thank you. That was a really great answer to the first one. So the second one was about culture.
That's right.
Different, like fostering the collaborative and supportive culture in terms of selecting people, and then just fostering the cultural practices within the company.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think I think I mentioned this. It was really accidental to start. What we had done is we really had just used the internal kind of test of, as you will, not official, but just some our internal test of, are these people we want to solve hard problems with? And more importantly, are these people who are excited about the same problems we're excited about? Are these people who are willing to accept less pay at the time, or harder working hours because they're making an impact on students' lives? And that's how we hired to start. It's not the most sophisticated hiring process, but it worked. And what we ended up doing is getting about 30 to 40 people who were just passionate, mission-aligned, collaborative, thoughtful people who were also generalists, people who were willing to do different things and grow. And that's what we kind of accidentally found. So as we started to grow and we started to realize, like, hey, I just saw someone pass in the hall. I don't know who that is. I don't know what they do. That's a really scary moment as a founder, because you suddenly start realizing, like, there's parts of the company that I don't understand, that's what's going on. They're just in a black box somewhere. And so you start asking this question of, how do I make sure that every person that we bring on board in this company is thinking about our future and our vision and our mission and our priorities in the same way that all of us are? How do we make sure that even if I've never met them in person, that there's a mutual understanding on what we're working on here? And so that's when we started to really take a step back and solidify what our culture was. We hadn't done that. It was all just kind of natural. But at that certain point, when you start getting to 30 and 40 employees, we took a step back and said, what are the parts of our culture that have truly allowed us to thrive? And we codified it. We turned it into a set of values. We turned it into a set of practices. We wrote stories about when that culture had really been shown through different actions that people had taken. And all of those things really allowed us to start scaling our culture, start really looking at it through the lens of, how do we make this reproducible, even if we're not the people in the room? And that was extremely important, is just kind of scaling that culture. The other thing we did is we started to take actions as leaders that we thought exemplified the culture that we had, which was collaborative, which was learning, which is this idea of, yes, the problems we're working on are high stakes, but you're allowed to try things and fail. And we did that through just different things that we employed within the company. When it comes to like learning, we created learning stipends where people could go and learn anything they wanted on the company dollar. You want to learn how to play the guitar? We'll pay for it. You want to go and learn about how to do better gardening? We'll pay for it. And so we started to create this culture of, hey, we are humans that are still learners. We're always learners. Another thing that we really prioritized is mental well-being and mental health. And so we started bringing yoga and meditation and all of those things in-house, where we actually provided that every day to all of our employees, so that they knew that the way that we looked at a healthy engagement with work was through this mentally healthy lens. Finally, we spent a lot of time doing a lot of presentations and a lot of opportunities for our own employees to present on when they had collaborated with one another to actually produce really exceptional things. So we would have these big events where employees could come forward every week, or sorry, once 1 week during the year, and actually present something they had worked on with another employee that wasn't directly a project they had been assigned. And employees would come forward with, in partnerships with sales team members, marketing team members, and engineering members. All these different groups would come together on a problem they were really excited about and present to the company all the things they had tried and how it had worked. And this really exemplified the culture of experimentation, but also just collaboration. So it's with those activities, it's with the codification of your values and what you're really trying to do. And then in your onboarding, making sure that all new employees know what your culture is and what you expect of them. All of those things really contributed to a more scalable culture at the end of the day. Great question.
I just follow up on
Yeah.
that, which was, how'd you know to do that?
That's a great question. We had a lot of mentors that would basically, what our goal was is, can we identify mentors who did basically solve the challenges we did with their own company about 2 years before we did. And so we would go and meet with these other founders and say, like, we're having this problem where we feel like our company's getting out from under us. We don't know exactly, we don't feel as confident that people are making the decisions that we would want them to make. We don't feel as in control. What would you do? And these people would come back to us and say, these are things that we had tried in the past. These are things that we had discovered. And a lot of them would come back and say, culture, solidifying the culture was one of the core things we had to do right now while the company was small. Yeah, great question. Yeah.
So yeah, I want to get some feedback. I don't know if people online can hear me or not, but I think your presentation was really fantastic. Partly because you told the story, right? So you showed how all of you were living in this tiny little place, and I think that we get this strange idea of what being an owner, especially a unicorn, is, right? And people don't see the sweat, blood, sweat, and tears that it took. And I think that just my advice for you is continue to emphasize that with students, with anyone at any age who is thinking of creating a startup, because they really have to see you're not going to be rich from day one, but not even from year one. So I think that these things are things which, if you're talking to an entrepreneurship class, if you're speaking at a startup event, I really emphasize these, because it really, the mindsets of entrepreneurs are completely different than, let's say, W-2 employees. And that's one thing that they have to start to imagine. What is my life going to be like? So I really like how you did that storyline. Something completely different. And actually, your question was something that I wanted to know too. So that's good. Like mentorship at every initiative that you had, asking for help, finding the right people. That's also so important. Completely different question. It's more product related and scaling, I suppose.
Yeah.
We've lived in Europe for quite a long time, and privacy rules are completely different.
Yes.
So when you're talking about scaling up your product and perhaps looking at other markets to go to, do you take those into account? Because I guess the US doesn't have, California has maybe strict privacy rules compared to the rest of the US, but not, for example, as in Europe.
Yeah.
So have you thought about those market challenges? Are those things that would keep you from growing? What is your thought?
It's an excellent question. We actually view the way that we approach privacy as one of our differentiators. We feel like we've made it like a core tenet of our business that student privacy should be at the center of every decision that we make. No matter what the current laws are, we've tried to go above and beyond. So we've established a lot of things internally and operationally around how we handle student data, how we go and de-identify that data to make sure that it can never be traced back to that student, how we allow students to delete the data after they've graduated, all of those sort of things. And we've thought about it through the lens of international expansion, absolutely, and how we can support that. But we've also thought about it mostly through the lens of what would we want if we were students? Like how would I want to be treated as a high schooler when it comes to my data and my privacy? When we launched GoGuardian Teacher, we actually put a notification in every student's computer whenever their teacher connected to it that the teacher could now see their screen. We had educators who hated this. They wanted to pop in, see what students were working on and catch them in the act. That's not what we were trying to build. We weren't building a spy tool. What we were trying to building was a collaborative real-time tool. And so we've taken that same sort of idea of thinking about it through the lens of, if I was a student, what would feel fair to me? Like what would feel like a fair, honest relationship to me, and building it into all of our products. And we've continued to see the benefits of this. We did that for our own beliefs, but we've continued to see the benefits of this later on in marketing and PR stories about us, where even the most negative ones will admit they go above and beyond the competitors. They show students whenever they're on a device that's being monitored, that they're being monitored. They de-identify data, they delete student data after the student has graduated. They take all of these security precautions. And again, just by the nature of that, it also allows this international expansion.
Yeah, I would definitely advise you to do that, to take a really good test case and maybe take a smaller country and see how it works there. And then you might be able to convince the bigger countries like Germany, France, UK that this really can work. It's just advice.
No, I really appreciate it. Yeah, that's super useful. Yeah.
It's kind of a general question, but just in terms of being a young entrepreneur, started something out of college while obtaining a degree and everything. What piece of advice would you give to someone in a younger generation who wants to make a mark on the world and do things to better the world around them?
Yeah. I'd say there's two key pieces of advice I'd give through that lens. One is that if you focus on problems that you are actually excited about solving, and when I say excited about solving, I mean you are excited about the future state of the world when that problem is solved, even if you don't solve it. That's how you know it's a real problem to be solved, is even if you aren't the one to solve it, even if you aren't the one to be rich off of it, if you're excited about the world's future state because it's been solved, that is a problem worth taking a risk on, in my opinion. So I think making sure that the problems you're actually thinking about are those problems is one. The other thing is, I'd say get the failures out of the way early. Spend a lot of your time failing. Every failure is a huge opportunity for growth. And I don't just mean the failures in starting a business. I mean the small personal failures. I mean blowing up on your friend emotionally because you overreacted to something. Like all of these moments, as long as you look at them really as moments of learning, I feel like you should spend a lot of time, especially when you're younger, getting those failures out of the way, spending that time trying to develop those skills that are ultimately going to lead to a business, and get rid of that fear of failure, because there's nothing to be afraid of. We're failing every day. It's a good thing. It just provides an opportunity and a platform for us to iterate and grow off of. So to summarize that last piece of advice, I'd say redefine your relationship with failure. Look at failure as a moment of iteration, as a moment of growth, and less of a moment of just something that says something about your own personal worth. Yeah.
Another question from AS Class.
Great.
Can you talk a bit about your experience in raising capital and attracting investors?
I would love to. I have so many opinions about this. Oh my gosh. All right. So I'm going to go back a few slides really quick because I think this is important to highlight. So when we started our business in 2014, no investors wanted to talk to us. They just weren't interested. There wasn't enough money in education. They thought education was a cool, I don't want to say concept, it was a real thing, but it was a cool, impactful thing to do in the world, but it wasn't going to make them any money. And so we had zero interest from investors to actually invest in us, other than one of our co-founders who was able to put a little bit of money in himself. And so we had to rethink about how we were going to fund the initial part of our business. And it actually ended up being one of the most positive things that we could have done early on. And that is, we went to schools and we said, hey, we're going to ask you for the full year up front in payment. We're not going to charge monthly. We're not going to charge at the end. We'd like the full year of payment up front. And if you buy 3 to 5 years, we'll discount it heavily. So if you just give us this full amount of money up front, we'll get a discount. And enough schools did that we were able to actually run our company without any investment whatsoever. And since day one, our company has never needed an investment dollar. We've been cash flow positive since day one. And that was because of the constraints that were kind of imposed by the investor community, because they weren't interested. And then we decided we're not a real company unless we raise money. One of our biggest mistakes ever is like, hey, we're worried that maybe there's going to be, maybe this school funding is going to fall out and we're going to need to support the company for a few years without it. We should go and raise a Series A. It's what a real companies do. And we did. And we never used this money, but we sold a decent percentage of the company, too much, in order to do it. And those investors turned out to not be very helpful. And so there was kind of two problems there. Not one, we had lost some control of the business, but number two, we didn't think critically about the investment partners we had brought on. We really looked through the lens of, these people seem great. They seem excited about what we're working on. They're probably great investors for us. What we should have asked is, in the hardest moments, when things are going the worst ever in the company, are these people that we can go to and feel like they're going to help us solve these problems, and they're going to do it in a way that makes us feel like we're supported? If we would have asked that question, I think we would have done things differently. And I don't want to harp on our Series A investors. They were actually decent, like they weren't mean or anything like that. But I think when you're looking for investors, you really should be looking for partners, people who can help add value other than just money to your business. If it's purely a financial relationship, it's probably not going to be worth it. Since then, we've gone on to raise money from other investors that we've been extremely happy to work with. And the main way we've really approached that is there opportunities in the market that we are so excited about and that we know are the areas that we want to go into because they match our mission, but that we can't because we don't have the resources. And that was the moments for us when we realized that we would need to go and raise more money. Again, not to run the business. We've been cash flow positive since day one, but because our growth rate, the needs we had to grow in terms of hiring were immediate and substantial. And so that's really what we used for those relationships in the future. I think one thing, sorry, I'll get right to you. I think one other thing to call out about, we really approached investor relationships differently after our Series A, where instead of us feeling like we were going and pitching a business that was going to make a bunch of investors rich, the way we really went about pitching it in the future was really more about just highlighting the problems we were solving and demonstrating to investors that the problems we were solving were forever. They were problems that were going to exist for the future of education. Yes, they would change and grow in some ways, but they were real core problems that we were solving. And that our approaches to solving those problems were not just valuable, but in a lot of ways differentiated in the ways that we were approaching them. And that the team that we had built was going to be the team that was going to solve those problems. So that way, when the investors were looking at our company, they weren't looking at it through the lens of a spreadsheet, although we couldn't stop them and they probably did. We also looked at it through the lens of kind of bringing them along for the ride in terms of the mission and the vision and the unique value we were offering in the space. Yeah, Mark.
My question maybe, where do you see the future of education? I guess there's like a future projection. And then I'm curious about the 10 employees and 250K students.
Yes.
So who are those 10 people other than the
Yeah.
co-founders? And then the 250K, is it like school district or different school district?
Yeah, great question. Let's see where to start. Where is the future of education going? I wish I knew. I really do. But I think the things that we can kind of start talking about and confidently say are things that will be evaluated through the educational lens. Is I think we'll see a healthy evaluation of how technology can aid learning, especially personalized, equitable learning in the future. But I use the word healthy very intentionally because I think there's a world where we overcorrect and where we start looking for technology to solve a lot of the future problems in education. And I don't think it can. I don't think it should. And so what I'm hoping and what I'm thinking is that a lot of schools are going to start becoming very sophisticated in how they evaluate, how technology will be applied in the educational experience. And I think they should. And I think the evaluation of the technology that when they're thinking about it is going to be really viewed through the lens of outcomes. Is this at the end of the day improving student outcomes? And if not, then what is the true value that it is offering to my students? I think that's critical. I think another key thing that software can really help do in the educational space in the future is really putting the teacher back into the position of a coach and a mentor, and less as a disciplinarian, less as a data collector, less as a data preparer. If we can use technology to help augment the teacher, where they can spend all of their time and energy really being that energizer, that guide, that creator, that coach in their class, and allow technology to really help augment, prepare their lessons, identify struggling students, and help them kind of present material. I think we're going to be in a world where teachers are a lot happier and a lot more productive, and where students are getting much more of the benefits for it. Finally, I think there's a world where technology can really help personalize the educational experience. This isn't new. This is something that's been talked about for many, many years, adaptive learning and personalization. But I do think we're really at a critical point, where the accumulation of data, the techniques in machine learning, and the relationship with teachers and students and digital material can actually evolve to a point where we'll see more and more learning happening in a personalized way, not just in a kind of an analog to the digital way. And the second question was, who are the 10 employees? I think 4 of us were engineers. And then we had 1 support person, 3 salespeople, and 2 business people, if I recall correctly. Most of them were college friends of my co-founders, but some of the people, no, we didn't. Yeah, I'd say about 3 of the people were not people that we knew, that were willing to take a risk and live in an apartment or work out of an apartment. Yeah, and then the 250,000 students were spread out. We had a bunch of school districts or schools that were trying us at the time. Great question. Anything else?
Last call for questions.
Last call for questions. I'll go ahead and go to this. Awesome. Well, thanks for having me, everyone.